Thanks so much for being with us today. We all know what it's like to have broken relationships. We've been referring to these broken relationships as bad blood. It's almost like a wound that gets infected. Sometimes we end up with something worse than we had in the first place. That's the nature of bad blood. All of us have had it, none of us want it, but none of us are immune to having bad blood relationships. What we've been doing in this series that we're ending today is we've been looking at some principles to help guide our bad blood relationships back to a place of health. Here's some things that we've learned. If you haven't been with us during the series, it'll give you a little bit of a catch-up if you would. Here's the first fill in the blank on your message outline. We've learned this, that there is a sense that my peace depends upon me. The main verse that we've been looking at in this series was written by the great missionary Paul. He wrote it to a church in the ancient city of Rome. And in Romans 12:18, Paul, who was uniquely qualified to write this because he knew bad blood, he had relationships all around him that were filled with bad blood. Here's what he said. He said, if it's possible, as far as it depends upon you, be at peace with everyone. Some of the things that we've learned in this series, Pastor Garrison last week talked about this, that if you have done something wrong to someone, here's the answer. We need to repent. That's a Bible word we don't use very much today, but in essence, we need to go to that person and ask for forgiveness. On the other hand, if you have been wronged by someone has done something to you, the appropriate answer is for us to forgive. And most of us would say, I have no trouble forgiving someone just as soon as they apologize to me. And we've learned in this series that may never happen. We've been reminded that offering forgiveness is as much for you as it is for the other person. We've also discovered that it takes two people to make reconciliation happen. Two people to make reconciliation happens. But what happens when one person's not cooperating? What happens when one person's not helping out? They're not doing their part. Notice this fill in. There may be times where the relationship will never be the same. As much as you may want it, it may never be the same. But here's one thing I hope you have learned. You can still have peace about the relationship, even if you do not have peace in the relationship. The great challenge that we face in these bad blood relationships is when we get the feeling that we need to keep going further is trying to make reconciliation happen. We begin to feel like more and more depends upon me. Maybe you've taken that long empathy walk that we talked about and you got on the other side of the relationship, look back on it from their perspective. But it seems the more that you do, the more they seem to be moving away. So how long does it depend upon me? How long do I need to forgive? How long do I need to show mercy when they're not playing along with me? Look at this fill in. When does my continued extension of assistance become irresponsible? In other words, at what point do you say enough is enough? When do you, after you step back and you look at that relationship, maybe others are helping you to see what's going on and you realize it's a toxic relationship. It's not healthy. In fact, it's actually dangerous. As you look at this person, the relationships around them, you see collateral damage all around. The Bible has a word for a person like this. The Bible refers to them as a fool. And you may say, as you look at this relationship, you may be having a hard time reconciling with this person because he or she is making foolish decisions over and over. They're behaving like a fool. So there's tension in the relationship. But what makes a fool a fool? Well, in Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11, the wisdom writer tells us this. It says, a fool repeats his foolishness. That's what makes a fool a fool. They continually repeat their foolishness. The feeling goes like this. Foolish people or fools continually, there's the word, continually behave in ways that hurt themselves and or they hurt other people as well. So here's a question for you. Are you trying to reconcile with someone who's a fool? You need to understand that because fools don't take ownership of their side. They don't take responsibility for what is legitimately theirs. Isn't this next fill in the blank true? Foolish people don't change their own behavior to meet the demands of life. Every day, you and I are making changes in the way we respond to people, the way we act to meet the demands of everyday life. That's just part of being human. On the other hand, a fool doesn't live that way. Instead, they want reality around them to change. They want reality to change to accommodate the way that they want to live. Solomon, who wrote Proverbs 26, verse 11, was considered one of the wisest men who has ever lived. He says something very profound, but also is very unsettling at the same time. Actually, it's really disgusting. Here's what he says. As a dog returns to its vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Now, have you ever seen a dog do this? Have you ever seen a dog throw up and then they eat their vomit? It's kind of actually disturbing. In fact, I have a video I want to show. No, I don't have a video. But I do have a couple of pictures to show you. Have you ever seen this? This is something I've never understood about dog owners. I happen to like dogs and so forth, but kissing your dog, got a little tongue action going on here. Check out this next picture. Look at the tongue on that dog. I'm going like, do you realize that this creature would eat its own vomit if it had the chance to do so? And here you are kissing them. Well, fools kind of do the same thing. It's over and over, even if it hurts them, even if it hurts other people. They make terrible choices. They make hurtful decisions. They're irresponsible in their behavior. So here's the question. At what point do you establish a boundary? At what point do you establish a boundary in the relationship? When do you get to the point where you say enough is enough? Maybe it's time to cut bait. Maybe it's time to simply say it's not worth it. When someone's toxic or foolish irresponsibility creates collateral damage in your life and in their life, it's time to set a boundary. When a fool is putting you in harm's way, you need to create a boundary. Notice this. Please understand this about boundaries, because we think of boundaries, we don't like it necessarily. But boundaries are healthy in this case. They're very healthy. They are especially needed when you're dealing with foolish or toxic people. Foolish or toxic people who may include people like this. People who want to continually borrow money from you. People who want to live in your house. People who continually say hurtful things to you. People who manipulate you or have too much control over you. People who seem to be taking advantage of your goodness or your desire for reconciliation. If any of these things are true, you need to set boundaries in your life. Because here's what a boundary will do for you. Boundaries establish what you are responsible for and what the other person is responsible for. In other words, it's kind of like drawing a line in the sand and you say, this is where my responsibility ends and it's where yours begins. Now, if you've never dug deep or thought a lot about boundaries, I want to encourage you to pick up a copy of this book entitled Boundaries by John Townsend and Henry Cloud. This is the landmark book when it comes to boundaries. It came out several years ago, but it is an incredible read. I encourage you to pick up a copy. Not only is there a copy of boundaries in general, but they also have boundaries in marriage. They have boundaries in dating. They have boundaries with kids. They have boundaries with in-laws. They really don't have an in-laws book, but I thought some of you might get excited if you heard that. But I want to encourage you, pick up a copy of this book. It will greatly, greatly help you. What we want to do this morning, even though there's tension in relationships, there's also truth. And we want to look today at a few principles that, again, the great missionary Paul wrote, this time not in the church to the Christians in Rome, but to a group of churches in a region called Galatia. This is found in modern-day Turkey today. In Galatians chapter 6, in a letter he wrote to these churches, he makes this statement. He says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Now, if you're watching this and you don't consider yourself a follower of Jesus, this really doesn't apply to you. This is optional if you would. But if you and I claim to be followers of Christ, this is our assignment. Jesus actually is the one asking us to do this. Paul's just passing it along. When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, at times it means that you and I are going to need to help someone else carry their burdens. But what is a burden? Here's our working definition. A burden is anything of excess, anything that is too big for one person to carry alone. Now, we're going to kind of flesh this out in just a moment, so hang in there with me. Paul then goes on in the next sentence, and he addresses our attitude towards those we're trying to help. Here's what he says in verse 3. He says, if anyone thinks there's something when they're not, they deceive themselves. Now, let me ask you, have you ever met somebody like this? They thought they were all that, and you're sitting there going like, no, you're not. I love how the New Living Translation translates this same verse. It says this: if you think you're too important to help someone, you're not only fooling yourselves, notice this, you're not that important. I love that reality check that they give us there. But in our egocentric world, we have the tendency to think that if everybody's life is like a play, guess what? We play the lead role. And so often our minds revolve around ourselves along with our actions. So Paul's giving us a warning. He's saying, watch yourself. Because it's so easy to think as we look at people in need who have burdens in their life, what's your problem? And it's really dangerous when we say something like this in our minds. I would never allow myself to get into that situation. Two quick things on that. That's not a great perspective to begin to try to help someone. And second of all, you and I are not immune from the very same thing happening in our life. If you think you're something when you're really not, Paul says you're deceiving yourself. He goes on in verse 4 and he says this: each one should test their own actions. Here he's talking about personal responsibility. And the reason he's doing that, because it's so easy for you and I to pick up a magnifying glass to look in someone else's eyes, or to pick up our binoculars to get a view from a distance to see what's going on in somebody else's life, when all the time Paul would say to us, what we really need to pick up is we need to pick up a mirror. And instead of looking at other people, we need to look at ourselves, and we need to ask ourselves a question. On your outline, here's the question we need to ask ourselves: am I doing what I need to be doing? In other words, before I help you, am I carrying what I need to carry? What's my responsibility? And then look at this next fill in the blank. I should not ask you to help me carry something that I'm not carrying myself. You shouldn't ask someone to fully carry your burden for you. In Galatians 6:4, he goes on and he says this. After we've looked at ourselves, he says, then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else. This is a good kind of pride he's referring to here. This is not a haughty kind of pride he just referred to, but a good kind of pride. You've accomplished something. Here we are in May, and coming up on June is graduation month. And there are many high school seniors, many college seniors who are going to be graduating. And they should take a great sense of accomplishment, a good kind of pride in what they have indeed accomplished. They have carried what they were supposed to carry, if you would. Then he goes on in verse 5 and he says something that kind of throws a little curveball at us. He says, for each one should carry their own load. Now, we look at that and we go, wait a minute now. Just a couple of sentences ago, you told us we're to help each person carry their burdens. And now you're telling us each one should carry their own load. That's a little confusing. That almost sounds like it's a contradiction. But really, as we're going to unpack it, no, it's not. Look at this fill-in. Our load in this case, where he says each person should carry their load, and our load in this case is whatever that has been given to us to carry. So what are some things that have been given to you to carry? It's things like your feelings, your attitude, your behaviors. Parents, can you remember your speech to your kids? No one can change your attitude or your actions but you, that type of a thing. This is something that belongs to you. But also it would include things like our mortgage or our rent. It would include our utility bills, our car payments, and so forth. That's our load. To give you a better understanding of what we're talking about, let me give you an analogy. A burden that we're to share with someone, our burden is like a boulder. Let's say this was a big rock. This would be somebody's burden in someone's life. They can't carry this on their own. And so if they go and they're trying to pick this thing up, it's not going to happen. They have to have help. That's the burden that God is talking about in a person's life. Notice this fill in the blank. A burden is something that you are not meant to carry alone. God doesn't mean for you to do this on your own. You say, well, what does that look like? It looks like some things that are happening right now in our church family, to be honest with you. It looks like someone in the family gets really, really sick. And maybe they're in the hospital for an extended time. Maybe someone loses their job. Maybe somebody walks out of the family. Maybe it's mom, maybe it's dad, and the others are left behind. Maybe there's been a fire in the home or a devastating flood. Those are burdens. Those are where others need to step in to help that person during that difficult times. But then Paul says this, each one should carry their own load. There's no contradiction here. In fact, Paul actually uses a different word. When he uses the word for burden here, it's the word baros in the Greek, and it means in excess, what normal life would necessarily bring. The boulder, the burden, is something that is not normal in everyday life. We pray that few come our way, but they will come, and we pray they don't repeat themselves. But there are those boulders, those burdens in our life. So the analogy goes like this. A burden is a boulder, and your load is more like a backpack. Your load is like a backpack. What's in your backpack? It's like we said before. Here's some things that would be in your backpack. It's your feelings, it's your attitude, it's your behaviors, it's your mortgage payments, your car payments, it's your food and so forth. No one should do that for you. You shouldn't ask someone to carry your load. Your backpack is for you to do. The people who ask people to carry their backpack, this is where the Bible would describe them as being a fool. And that's where you and I need a boundary line. We need a boundary line that we don't cross. A boundary that says keep out. This is part of my responsibility in being a loving fellow Christian to you, that when you have that burden that you can't handle on your own, I need to be there to help you. But in everyday life, I do not need to help you with your backpack. That is your responsibility. So the boundary line clearly helps me to know this is where I stop. This is where you need to pick up in your own life. If you're in a bad blood relationship, you're doing maybe all you can to bring reconciliation in that relationship. You continue to reach out to them. You continue to try to help out. But in doing so, you feel like not only are you carrying your own load, but you almost feel like that person's asking you to carry their load as well. Let me tell you something about that relationship. It's not going to end well. It's not going to go great if you do that. Things are not going to get better. Look at this fill in the blank. Here's what happens. When we feel responsible for carrying another's load, it only makes things better? No. It only makes things worse. It only makes things worse. We can actually rob people of experiencing the outcomes of their decisions. You see, there's something that it just feels good. It feels good when you and I carry our own load. It feels good. Can you think back? Can you remember those times maybe where you paid your first rent and you just felt good about that? Or maybe your first mortgage payment. You felt good when you paid off that car. Or maybe you paid off that school loan type of a thing. I remember the first time I ever had to file federal taxes and I had to pay something to the government. Strangely enough, I know this is weird, I felt good about that, like I'm being an American adult type of a thing. I don't feel very good about it now. You know, I don't like writing those checks. But the first time, I thought that was big time stuff when I did that. That's my load to carry. And when I handle my load appropriately, it's good feelings that are produced inside of our lives. Positive things come as a result in our lives of carrying our own load. But remember this, what happens when someone doesn't carry their load? They lay their load down. They refuse to take responsibility for their load, what they should be carrying. Here's some things that happen. They get evicted from their apartment. Their house goes into foreclosure. Their car gets repossessed. The power company sends you some lovely notices. It says if you don't pay your utility bill in the next few days, you're not going to have gas or electricity or even water. The consequences of those negative things are meant to produce good in our lives. They're meant that we would look and see, that is my responsibility and I need to own it. I need to take responsibility. That's the desired outcome. But a fool continues to expect other people to carry their load. They repeat that kind of foolish behavior. Fill in the blank goes like this. We need boundaries. We need boundaries, which is a line of what depends upon me. This is my responsibility. And then it tells me what depends upon you. That's your load. Anybody watching a yard person? I love to do yard work. Don't ask me to do yours, although I would like to give you a little preemptive strike here. A new ministry here at New Hope is seniors. We're going to be sending you an email if there's a minor little home repair you need, or if there's some yard work like cutting some bushes and that type of thing. We want to come and do that for you. And so when you get that email, make sure you respond back to us. But let's say my yard is really, really looking good and I have worked hard. My grass looks incredibly good. But I look over at my next door neighbor and his yard is brown because he hasn't watered his grass. And I get so frustrated. Here's what I do. I take my sprinklers watering my yard and I turn them around so they're facing his yard, and now they're watering his yard. What is ultimately going to happen here? Now look at this next fill in the blank, because I think this is dead on. When you try to carry someone else's load, here's what happens. The other person is irresponsible and happy. They're happy you're carrying their load for them. While here's what's happening with you. You're being responsible for something that's not even yours. And what? You are miserable. That's what happens when we try to carry someone else's load that is their responsibility. It's not healthy and it's not helping. And again, I know that you're trying to help them. I know maybe you're even trying to reconcile the relationship. But it's not helping you, and it's certainly not helping them. Look at this fill in. You are actually helping them by letting them experience the consequence of not carrying their load. But you say, Pastor, that just doesn't feel very loving. I get it. I understand that. And you may say, well, but shouldn't we show grace and mercy and forgiveness and all? Shouldn't we do that? And the answer is yes, but it may not look like what you think it looks like. I want you to listen to this statement I'm going to make. It's not a fill in the blank. I'm going to read it twice, and then I'll show you a fill in the blank. Unconditional love necessitates conditional assistance. Let me read it again. Unconditional love, which we're to show to each other, necessitates conditional assistance. Here's the fill in the blank. Here's another way to say it. Unconditional love does not mean unlimited assistance. Some of you need to hear that. God has you watching and listening to this message to hear this one fill in the blank. Unconditional love does not mean unlimited assistance. For some, you may say, I don't have the resources. That's an easy out for you. I'd love to help you, but I can't. I don't have the means to. But for those who actually have the means to help, this is incredibly, incredibly challenging. Because it doesn't feel loving to conditionally assist someone. But I want you to understand, it may be the most loving thing you can do. Maybe the most loving thing you can say is drawing the line here. Here's the boundary. Yes, I will help you with the burden, but it is your load to carry. And I will not help you with that. And I will allow you to experience the natural consequences of being irresponsible with your own load. You may hate to say that. You may hate to think that. But it's something that is actually needed in that person's life. Look at this fill in the blank. One of the best words in establishing boundaries is the word no. It's the word no. And unfortunately, if you were here with us live in your program, you would find a little business card. It's the Just Say No card. If you would like one of these, send me an email and we'll get you one. But it's important that you and I learn to say no. In fact, let's just practice it right now. Some of you, you're watching your computer or your TV, and it may just be you, or maybe it's somebody else. Somebody may hear you talking, may think you're crazy. But just say it with me on the count of three. Let's just say no together. 1, 2, 3. No. Let's say it with a little more emphasis here. No. In fact, let me just say this. Here's a great time to say no. When someone comes to you and they continually want to borrow money, what are you going to say? No. No, I'm not going to do that. When someone wants to live in your home, what are you going to say? You're going to say, no, I'm not. No, that's not good. When someone says hurtful things to you continually, what are you going to say? You're going to say no to them. When someone manipulates you or has too much control over you, what are you going to say? You got to say no to that person. When someone seems to be taking advantage of you or your goodness or the desire to try to reconcile that relationship, what do you need to say? You have to learn to say no to them. And I want you again to understand, even though you may think that's not loving, it's actually the most loving thing you might be able to ever say to that person, because, notice this fill in the blank, sometimes the best love loves from a distance. Sometimes the best love loves from a distance. That's the power of love. And I just want to forewarn you, if you begin to set these boundaries and have these hard conversations with somebody that you probably really do love and care about, be ready for some very harsh things to come back your way. Don't be surprised if they say things like this. You call yourself a Christian and you're letting this happen? You're letting this happen to me? I thought we were family. And then they'll say this, how can you do this to me? Here's what you need to realize. You're not doing it to them. They did it to themselves. And if someone doesn't love them enough to say no to their life, they'll continue with this irresponsible behavior, and this cycle will go on and on until they spin completely out of control. Look at this next fill in the blank. Choosing not to give in doesn't mean you are giving up. Has God given up on you in spite of all the screw-ups and all the mistakes you and I have made? And the answer is no. God has never given up on us, and He never will. But that doesn't mean that we do not need to set boundaries. Not giving up doesn't mean that you are giving, not giving in rather, doesn't mean that you are giving up. We have hope. We have hope through Christ, that through a relationship with Christ, this person can change. Things can get better. We believe that that is actually possible. If you really get serious about setting some boundaries, here's just some little bullet points to remember. In setting boundaries, remember this. Boundaries should have a time limit. They don't go on forever and ever. At the very least, every 6 months, reevaluate your boundaries, maybe even sooner. Here's a second point. Stay open to what the future holds. Pray for change. Pray this person would grow and that these boundaries can be relaxed or even over time go away. Here's a third bullet. A boundary isn't a wall. A boundary is more like a fence. In fact, we have a picture here to show you. A boundary is more like a fence with a gate. And notice what the gate has on it. It has a handle on it, but the handle's on your side. You can open that gate when it's appropriate, when you see the changes that need to be seen in their lives. Look at this next bullet. The boundary, remember, is really for you, not the other person. This boundary is for you. You're the one who needs the boundary. It's for you, not them. And then finally, remember this. Ask someone to hold you accountable for the boundary that you set. This is a team effort. This is not a single sport, if you would. Let's close this morning. What Jesus did on the cross, is the ultimate refusal of God to give up on you and to give up on me as His creation. He refuses to give up on us. And because God never gives up, we should never give up either. But I want to remind you of something I said a couple of weeks ago in our message. Here it is again. You and I will never passively find what you're not actively pursuing. In other words, you're not going to sit on your sofa one day and all of a sudden magically have peace. You have to pursue it. You will never passively find what you are not actively pursuing. Peace must be pursued, and it's a worthy pursuit. Look at this last fill in the blank. Making the effort is worth it, even if the relationship never finds its way back. And that is a real possibility. It may, even if it finds its ways back, it may never be the same. But here's why it's worth the effort. Because you can have peace about that relationship, even if you never have peace in the relationship. Paul was right. If possible, as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with everyone. 2 next steps I'm asking you to consider today. The first one is this. If you're in a relationship and God has really kind of nudged you about this idea of setting some boundaries, would you say, I'm going to do that, but do it in the next 3 days or you'll forget it and it'll be long gone? Take the action steps, set the boundaries. And here's the second one. And it's going to be hard for you listening at home to do this, but we'll send you a card if you'd like one. Take that little get that no card, put it in your purse, pull it in your wallet to remind you of the power of that word no. I hope next week you'll join us as we begin a brand new message series as we look at the life of one of the greatest followers of God ever, and certainly in Scripture, King David. Let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for these last few weeks together. We thank you for the power of boundaries. Boundaries are good. You gave us boundaries. They're like guardrails that you've given for us there for our protection, Father, and for the benefit of other people around us. I pray for, especially for those who are struggling with this very issue, this message has really hit home with them. That God, you would help them. And maybe they need to find a counselor. Maybe it's just a friend, but somebody just to talk this through with, to set some appropriate boundaries. And God, would you give them the power to stay with those boundaries? It's going to be difficult. We know that going in. There's going to be pushback. There's going to be shoving, if nothing else, type of thing. But God, help them to stay the course. And I pray, Father, that you would do what human effort can't do, and that you would begin to change their hearts and their lives from the inside out. But Father, I pray too for those relationships that maybe they will never be the same. Help us to get to a point where as Paul said, as far as it depends on us, that we can live at peace with all people. Because, Father, even though we may not have peace in that relationship, we can have peace about the relationship. Thank you that you can help us reach that point in our lives so that we can walk around with that peace that you and you alone can give. Help me.